Hey reader, this is Centaur here, and today we are continuing in our unit review series by looking at medium anti-tank guns. This is specific to the artillery choice. We will not be looking at vehicle-mounted anti-tank guns today, because frankly, there's a lot of those, and they fill a lot of different roles, and that requires its own video. But today we are continuing as we're looking at the various artillery choices by looking at medium AT guns. Not every nation gets access to these. Some nations wish that they got access to these. But for those who do get them, we're going to be taking a look at how effective and how useful it actually is as part of their roster. As we normally do, we're going to be looking at it from a lot of different angles. We want to make sure that we reward units for what they were both used for historically, as well as what they are useful for in your army. And so we're going to take a look at 6 areas: their range rated fire, the opportunity cost of taking them, and how to best maximize that investment. We're going to look at their pin generation, their damage potential, both whether or not they are firing with the fire order or whether they have to advance, because that does change the math quite a bit for anti-tank guns. We're going to be looking at how well they are at objective holding, because that's a thing that you would traditionally want from a fixed weapon. We're going to look at their target prioritization, how to get the maximum benefit out of it by targeting the right things with the right tool. And then we'll look at one of the changes that I would make to the medium AT gun to make it more appealing in bolt action. So to start off with, it doesn't matter whether you're in 2nd edition or 3rd edition, the range and rate of fire is the same. It's going to be 1 attack, 60 inches maximum range. Obviously, some of the other rules surrounding the medium AT gun have changed. So things like no longer having a -1 to hit for being at long range. The pen -1 for still being at long range is still there. But it does mean that it is generally easier, thanks to that, as well as the anti-tank gun general rule. It is easier now to hit with an AT gun than it was before, which is nice. This is effectively a light AT gun with an extra 12 inches of range and a +1 penetration for 20 to 25 points more, depending on whether or not you're required to take a gun shield or things like that. So it's not bad. And it is fixed, so it can only fire to the front arc 45 degrees on either side of the breech. Okay, which is not horrible. This is, again, pretty stock standard for a lot of artillery. And as a mid-ground, this is actually really good. Pen +5 is a really good thing to start with. As you're looking at our opportunity costs, though, there are other changes that have made it an interesting choice when it comes to point allocation. So for starters, it is a pretty expensive artillery choice. It is actually 5 points cheaper than it was in 2nd edition. It's down to 70 points regular instead of 75. And even though it's expensive as regards other artillery options, it is pretty cheap when you're looking at your access to medium anti-tank guns. So if you want that sweet spot of a +5 to wound, which is quite reliable against a lot of different damage values, if you're taking it on anything else, literally anything else in the game, the cheapest you're going to get is like an 85 point Portee or something like that, which is pretty fragile, far more fragile than this medium anti-tank gun team is, or could be 200 or even more points, depending on whether it's a light, medium, or heavy tank with potentially other special rules that also increase the cost alongside that medium AT gun. So as regards other medium AT gun choices, it's actually quite cheap. You're looking easily half to a third of the cost of what other things might be. And depending on what you're looking at, it could be even as much as a 75% discount on getting the firepower, right? Admittedly, you might not be on like a damage value 10 chassis with some other useful special rules, but it could be as much as a quarter of the cost of that KV-1 or Churchill or something like that. The issue that it tends to run into is that the medium AT gun at 70 points regular costs the same as 2 regular light anti-aircraft guns, which are generally going to perform better against most things other than like veteran, larger, serious armored vehicles. You can get 2 inexperienced medium machine gun teams, which are arguably going to be better against infantry, obviously, than a 1-inch HE template coming out of a one-shot weapon. And you could possibly get a machine gun or heavy machine gun tankette for the same cost, sometimes even cheaper than 70 points regular. So it's tricky from that perspective to justify the costs. There are other things you're passing up on that might be more advantageous, especially determining, based on what kind of army you're up against, right? If you're only playing against people who are using light armor or smaller vehicles, or maybe they're doing just infantry swarms or something like that, the medium AT gun is not going to do nearly the same work as any of the options we just talked about. It's also 10 points more expensive than a bazooka team, and it does have admittedly an extra 36 inches of range, which is nothing to sneeze at, but it's also fixed. So it's a lot easier to wrap around it. And then by extension of that, if it has to turn, it's not nearly as likely to hit as a bazooka is on the following round. It does gain a gun shield, which is situationally useful for increasing the resilience of your team. Might not actually be more resilient than a bazooka team. We'll talk about that when we get to objective holding. It also doesn't have shape charge, so it is still suffering that -1 to penetration at long range. So it may not even hit as hard as a bazooka team, but it also gets one crew, so it is less likely to be removed in one swell foop, right? Which is something we're thinking about. So from an opportunity cost perspective, what do I think of this? I don't think it rates poorly, but I also don't think it rates as poorly as some people think it does, especially if we're moving toward a meta with larger, more serious armored vehicles. I think the medium AT gun could be a really good shout. More on that a little bit later. As we look at pin generation, I'm going to be honest, it's not a good pin machine. In second edition, you could reasonably get about 2 to 3 pins per game, assuming that you were getting shots off every single turn, which at 75 points regular is about 25 to 38 points per pin, which is not good value. Okay. In third edition, because you're getting that extra +1 to hit, so you're starting at a 3+ to hit, and that probably is your hit modifier if you're firing from a fire order or an ambush order. You can get a good bit more. You could easily get to 4 hits, but even if you have to turn once, or, you know, if you're not able to get the shots in when you like it, you know, or something like that, it's, you know, you have to move maybe on a given turn or to avoid a mortar, you might actually get to 3 to 4 pins per game in third edition. So it is slightly better. And at 70 points regular, it means that your points per pin is actually lower. It's closer to 17 to 23 points, which is not horrible. It's not great, but it's not horrible. I think in reality, you're not buying this as a pin generating machine. And that's not going to surprise anybody, because by simply looking at it, that's more the realm of what howitzers and autocannons are trying to do. They're just doing it in different ways. In reality, what you're paying for with an anti-tank gun of any stripe, but I think this is especially true of the medium AT gun, because it is more expensive than the light anti-tank gun, but it doesn't have the higher HE value that other larger anti-tank guns than it also get. What you're really paying for is armor removal. And so toward that end, let's take a look at damage. So I have 2 different charts here that we're looking at. The first is a consideration of a 3+ to hit, assuming that you're shooting at a vehicle with a fire or an ambush order, how likely you are to result in a damage result on the chart. Now, this doesn't factor in the chance of potentially getting cover. So if they're getting a 5+ cover save, slash all of these by about a third. If they're getting a heavy cover save, then slash all of these in half. And that would give you your actual estimations on how likely you are to actually do a damage result on the damage chart to a target. Now, this could just be glancing damage in some cases, right? As you know, at the higher end of the scale, it's going to be just glancing hits on people. Or it could be full damage, right? In which case you'd be pretty reliable, and you'd be doing a pretty good job in terms of actually doing removal on it. 50-50 chance that they're removed, 2 out of 3 chance that they're at least having to make a morale test, if not outright removed, in order to see if they flee the game. All of that's good. But you can see here from the chart, at the very highest levels, pen +5 is not that great. Damage value 11 or damage value 10, you're just barely breaking over 10% in the 3+ to hit category. When you start reaching that medium AT gun, medium tank though, with this medium AT gun, you're already at like 16.67% chance. That's the same as taking 1 dice and trying to roll for a 6, right? It's really not that bad, all things considered. And that kind of makes sense, because in order to do full damage, you're looking for 2 out of 3 chances to hit, followed by a 50% chance of at least glancing it. And then from there, about a 50% chance of actually destroying it if you don't end up glancing it, right? So like the odds kind of, it makes sense the more you look at it. You're basically doing 2/3, and then it's basically half and half, right? It comes out to a 1/6. So on the whole, not bad for any weapon in the game to have a basically 1 in 6 chance of removing a damage value 9 vehicle. As you start getting to damage value 8, it is slightly better, mostly because, again, you have a little more freedom. You don't have to worry about being at long range. You can, in fact, do some serious punching damage into them most of the time. You're not just trying to headhunt the 6 on the damage roll. As you get to 7 and 6, it gets even better, obviously. And with damage value 6, it gets really good because of the fact that you're hitting 66% of the time, and anything that's not a 1 will destroy it. There's no damage chart afterwards. You're just going to destroy it, which means if you're taking a shot with a fire or an ambush order on a 3+ with an anti-tank gun, with a medium AT gun, you have a better than 50-50 chance of just outright destroying that vehicle. You're going to get it, which, by the way, historically does line up. Okay, if a smaller unarmored vehicle is hit by one of these things, it's gonna have a really bad day. It then drops dramatically, of course, when we get to a damage value 5 and 4, because we're switching rounds, right? We're not rolling pen plus 5 at this point. We're going up against veteran infantry because there aren't any damage value 5 vehicles. And it also means we drop from a 3+ to hit to a 4+ to hit because we don't get that extra +1 to hit against vehicles that we get from the anti-tank gun rule. So the numbers are going to change, okay? We're dropping to a 4+ to hit, but we still have a pretty good chance of hitting. And then from there, we have about a 50-50 chance of doing wounds. And then we get a 2 and 3 chance of doing wounds once we get to damage value 4. And then at damage value 3, it actually gets really good. I had to actually calculate 3 different things here. The first is a consideration of whether you're shooting at a soft skin TOW or a Tushonka, which is technically it's a machine gun on the back of a carriage that counts as a tank style, armored platoon style option. And so you're, again, basically right where you were with damage value 6 because chances to hit haven't changed. Chances to wound haven't changed because you can't get better than a 1. Your chance of doing HE damage to inexperienced troops has gone up because you're starting at a 50% chance of hitting on a 4+, and then you're moving to anything but a 1 in order to do at least 1 wound. Right. So, your chances against DV3, not horrible, even in an anti-infantry, anti-personnel role. The trick tends to be when you end up at something closer to a 5+ to hit. Now, this could be that you're firing against infantry and you have a pin on you. This could be because you are firing at a enemy vehicle and you had to advance in order to do so. It could be that you're firing with a fire order, so you would start at a 3+ against a vehicle, but you have a pin and you're down to only 1 crewman, right? There are actually a couple of different ways that you could hit a 5+ to hit. But as you can see there, the math is not great. The best that you're going to get is around 27%, which kind of confirms that when you're going through deployment on these, you really don't want to have to turn them basically at all. You want to make sure that they have good, solid lanes to fire through from that initial arc. You don't ever want to have to change that arc if you can possibly avoid it. And that does make this, I think, a little bit more tricky to use. But if you can get it, it can do pretty good removal pretty high up on the chart. So as we look at objective holding, we have 3 men, which is not bad. It's better than a lot of the team weapons that we looked at so far. It does have cover. You can guarantee cover because AT guns basically always come with a gun shield. And so you're always getting at least a 5+ cover save. If you have a better cover save from being in heavy cover, you would get something even better. But that also means that if you really needed to, these 3 guys could go down and they could improve that cover save from a 5+ to a 3+, unless, of course, the enemy wants to move all the way around you to try to get past the gun shield. So that's actually not horrible. And if you purchase them regular, the chances of winning them is, relatively easy in a dice-based game, 50% chance, but it could be a lot worse, right? There are teams that really excel at being inexperienced, and these guys are not one of them, which means they are going to be slightly harder to remove than some of those. They also do have excellent anti-armor damage on ambush. So if somebody tries to push you off of an objective by moving up an armored vehicle that has a harder time of being removed, newsflash, you might be able to remove it. And if you are on ambush, you might be able to catch it without a save, which is very good. You have a long reach for supporting advancing troops. You also have the ability to reactive fire if you are assaulted from the front, which not every weapon has. So at least you can do that. I don't know how much a 1-inch HE template, if you hit, is going to work. I don't know how great an armor-piercing round is going to be. If you're assaulted by a tank, that tank would have to feel pretty good about its chances of assaulting you. But technically you can, which is nice. But it does have a couple of drawbacks. And I am going to mention one other one that I didn't really put down here because it's highly situational based on the army. But it ties to the fact that I have these Belgian Chasseurs Ardennais or Ardennes guys over here on the right-hand side. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the drawbacks are, first of all, obviously, it's fixed, right? So it can't move and shoot on a given turn, which makes covering the objective a little bit harder. It makes, kind of a rolling defense of the objective a little harder to do as well, because you can't continue shooting at people as you fall back to the far side of the objective, giving one more turn before they can overrun you. This is mortar bait. People are going to take mortars, and as soon as they see that you have an artillery piece that's 70 points regular on the table, they're going to shoot at it. That's just the way it's going to be. And you could very easily have a redundant gun shield. As we mentioned in the light anti-tank gun video, one of the best things about AT guns, and historically how they were used, by the way, is that you would put them in cover, right? And then they would be on ambush and they would wait for something to come and then boom, they'd light up, getting the drop on whatever their target was. The problem with the gun shield rule in 3rd edition, as opposed to 2nd edition, is that it doesn't just add a +1 to the difficulty to wound the team. It just gives you a 5+ cover save if you don't already have one. It doesn't improve your save by 1. It doesn't do any of that. It's just a redundant form of protection. It doesn't give you a second chance at a 5+ save. It's just lost if you're in cover. And a lot of objectives where you would ideally want to put this thing would be in cover, right? So that's potentially problematic. You can kind of take advantage of it if like you could take cover from a side that you're not facing, especially if it's like a nice solid wall that people can't just hop over or get over, because then in an ideal world, you don't have to worry about potentially turning toward that side. People can't really attack you from that side, so you can turn your gun less and thus take advantage of your fire orders over advanced orders more often. But it's really a very situational sort of thing, and again, it doesn't solve the ultimate problem, which might be an enemy unit getting into scoring range and you can't do much about it. So before we move on to target prioritization and what you want to look at, there's one last thing I wanted to talk about, and that is there's a physical aspect to these guns as well. Now, over there in the picture, as I mentioned, you can see a picture of a Chasseur Ardennais section medium anti-tank gun. This is what it looks like in real life. You guys don't know me or my measurements, so me holding this in my hand doesn't mean much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the comparison of it to this light anti-tank gun that I have from the British paratroopers. Now, this comes quite often. You'll find it in like a paratrooper set. I want to say they even might come in the Royal Commando set. I don't remember if they come with an AT gun option or whether they're just relying on like AT grenades or Piats or whatever. But suffice it to say, we're going to take just a quick look at these to show you the physical size of this gun, which for the Belgians is quite the advantage. So here we go. This is the size and length of the light anti-tank gun. And this is the size and length of the Belgian 47mm medium AT gun. Okay. Belgians don't get access to a light AT gun. This is a medium AT gun. Furthermore, these are both Warlord models. These are the official models of the range, which means if you show up with this one to a tournament, this is the official model. It's not a sizing issue from some 3D print guy, okay? Complete aside, by the way, the French also had this gun, okay? This is part of the Francosphere style of AT guns, and it was short. It just had a really thick barrel, so it could fire a really big round. The result is it was very good for these mountain sort of troops, like the Chasseur Ardennais. It also means that you could fit it in buildings, bunkers, Maginot Line, things like that, quite easily because they don't physically take up nearly as much space, right? I mean, compare it to the base size of an infantryman. This is less than 2 infantrymen wide, well, long, and about an infantryman wide. It's not very wide at all. The result is some of these AT guns, one of the advantages they also have when it comes to objective holding is that they don't take up a lot of room, which means you can fit them into crazy spots. You might have a tiny little corridor between 2 buildings, but not in a building, in which case you could easily get away with putting this thing parked right in there, overlooking the objective, or maybe even in front of the objective with some of the crew being in range, but the gun itself is forward, so that way if people want to come and fight you, they got to fight you even off of the objective. They're not even in scoring range when they enter into assault. And you could use that for pretty good protection. You can place this thing literally almost anywhere. As long as there's an inch of space, this thing can fit. And that is pretty cool. So in general, while I don't think the medium AT gun is one of the strongest options for the artillery slot, I do think that there are unique situations like the Belgians, possibly the French, where because they've got these tiny, tiny medium AT guns, if you were looking for some added firepower, because you know you're going to go up against heavier armor, you just want to make sure you can at least pin things because they're taking veteran big tanks, you might consider taking some of these because they will be able to provide support for you in places where you normally wouldn't have it. And that is quite advantageous. So toward the end of these things are used for removal, not really anything else, what should you be shooting at? Well, for starters, and you're going to see this a lot when it comes to heavy weapons on the list, just from a value perspective, soft skin, transports, and tows. It's one of the reasons why we're seeing a lot of people running a lot of armored transports and not running a lot of unarmored transports is because the chance that you catch something in the open, you go ambush and you shoot that thing and you're probably removing that thing as long as you hit on that 3+, chances are you're removing it. That's money in the bag right there. And if you're doing a kill point mission, even if you don't do a whole lot of damage to the guys inside, you got a point, right? If you're taking out a tow, right? Somebody brought a horse-drawn limber just to pad their numbers, or a mule team. Nothing in this that says it has to be an armored target for you to get your pen +5 or for you to get that +1 to hit. It just has to be a vehicle, and transports all count as vehicles, including mule teams, single reindeer, and horse-drawn numbers. Okay. If that be the case, that is the thing to shoot at, because if you hit it, you're probably going to wound it, and your chances of hitting in this game, at least on a 3+ is pretty darn good. The second thing you want to go after are lightly armored vehicles. Damage value 7 transports are also a fantastic option here, especially if they have people inside. Even damage value 8 tanks and, larger, more bulkier armored vehicles are also pretty good choices. Okay. You have a pretty good chance of hitting because, again, they're vehicles. And you've got a pretty good chance of at least rolling on the wound chart. Even if you're not going to remove it in a single shot, if you can just immobilize a tank or a transport, the chance that they then get to do what they wanted to do, or the chance that you can set it up so you can get out of range of all of those forward-facing machine guns or something like that, is pretty high, right? You can now work around them. And what they paid points for on a mobile weapons platform, they aren't getting now because they got immobilized. They aren't mobile anymore. You can also use it against serious armored vehicles at damage value 9 to 11. You'll be reasonably successful. If nothing else, you got a decent chance of doing pins, which is good, right? Unless it's a damage value 11 veteran tank at long range, 3+ to hit, at least a pin, right? Maybe something better. We'll have to see. They also tend to work against inexperienced and regular weapons teams because your 1-inch HE template will do a pretty good number on 2 to 3 man squads, right? The 1-inch HE template means that with pen +1, even if they're getting cover save, you're at least wounding on like 2s or 3s generally because they're typically purchased inexperienced or regular, right? And you're probably hitting more than one person, which means you have a decent chance of doing one actual wound once you get to the wounding rolling dice, and you might get as many as 2, 3, or even 4, depending on how tightly compacted they are together. The 1-inch HE template also means D3 hits against a unit in a building. So if you can catch a unit in a building, you actually have a good chance of doing at least 2. And then from there, rolling 2s or 3s to wound. It's not horrible. And then finally, you also are a pretty good option against artillery choices, especially multiple rocket launchers. One, because the artillery system is typically manned by 2 to 4 people, and they're typically taken inexperienced or regular. So it's kind of like an inexperienced or regular team weapon, except that they also don't really want to move, right? If you're getting into a spitting match with your friendly autocannon, that might not be a good ending for you necessarily because you're hitting, every other turn or so. They're hitting probably every turn. Amount of damage that they're actually doing to either of you guys, I think it depends on who hits first, right? Will probably determine a lot of it. But then you're also getting at least guaranteed cover save against it. They only get it if they actually have cover, right? That they're in. So it all depends. But I think these are the things you should be shooting at. You can technically shoot at larger squads. You can shoot at veterans because, again, you have a high explosive shell. I don't think you're going to get a lot of value out of it. So I wouldn't personally do that. I think you're best against stationary targets that don't want to run away. You're good against lighter vehicles and can do okay against larger vehicles. And honestly, I think that's part of the reason why we don't see a lot of medium AT guns currently being taken in the current meta in 3rd edition. Might change if people's choices of armor change. But in general, I don't think we're going to get it. I think a lot of it comes down to the opportunity cost of how much else you could take other than this for the exact same number of points. The number of order dice that you're thereby passing up in order to take this thing. And in addition, the fact that you're not guaranteed to be going up against soft skin transports. You're not guaranteed to be going up against transports at all. People might just be running infantry right behind their tanks like the Americans did in World War II. So toward that end, we need another option. And I think there's a relatively simple change that will help to fix this. It's complicated, but I think it's the one that makes the most sense. And that is, it needs a points change. The number one reason why this gun looks a lot less appealing is because the cost of auto cannons went down. Since light AA guns are now only 35 points regular, that is 4 shots per turn, admittedly with only pen +2 or a 1-inch HE template, by comparison to 1 shot every turn with admittedly pen +5, but also that 1-inch HE template. Which means against infantry, this is not a good option. And you're guaranteed to be fighting infantry every single match because rifle platoons. Okay? Maybe they run big armor. Maybe they run big armor, they get the first drop, they shoot at you, and they clear you out. And now you don't get the benefit of what you paid for, right? Like there's just so many things that could potentially happen that make it so, yes, this is a tool and it's a useful tool for what it's designed to do, but it's not necessarily the best tool for what you're paying. Right? And I think if it went down at least to 65 points regular, probably lower than that, you probably just need to match cost with a heavy autocannon. it needs to be lower in order to make it more appealing. The reason that lands me on 65 is if we assume that the light anti-tank gun team stays at the same cost, which is part of the problem. Okay, we're trying to get the cost better on this. I think you need to pay at least 5 more points for that extra 12 inches of range, and it's probably an extra 10 points for the pen plus 1. Probably. Which means if you're starting at 50 points regular, you're probably looking at 65 points regular for a medium AT gun. Now, in reality, I think we actually just need to bring it in line pretty much with the cost of the heavy autocannon. Because the heavy autocannon is very similar in style and form to the medium AT gun. Often doesn't have a gun shield, but it often is a 4th crewman. So those two could probably even out at a plus 5 points each. And then it's just a question of, do you want more shots with a lower penetration? Or do you want one bigger shot to actually do the job? If this thing only costs 50 points, I think we would see medium AT guns about as often as we see AA guns. Of course, we'd literally never see howitzers because then the howitzers would all be priced too high, and the howitzers have been priced too high. We'll be talking about that a little bit later when we talk about medium howitzers as the next part of the artillery installment. But just suffice it to say, at least for now, as long as heavy autocannons are 50 points and light autocannons are 35 points regular, we are not going to see many of these. Now, you do have people like myself who, for specific armies, are running these guns. And I'm running 2 of them. I actually went out as soon as I saw the new edition drop. I bought a second one. I already had one from before because I figured, hey, you know what? If I'm going to have a potential for a free thing, I'm going to pick up a free AT gun as part of the old Belgian rules because I didn't pay any points for it. So literally anything it removes is extra value, right? And I'm not losing any order dice by taking this at 75 points regular because the order dice was free, right? That was kind of my thinking behind it. And to some extent, I haven't really changed my mind. I think you don't necessarily have to get your value out of this tool. What you really are using this for is board control. You're trying to make it so that your enemy's tank can't just go after your group of infantry because going after that squad of infantry moves them in range of this ambush gun, right? It's that level of crisscrossing the battlefield that says, are you sure you want to leave your tank there? Are you sure that's what you want to do? And since they've got that 60-inch range, you could have it deployed on one very far side of the battlefield. Your opponent starts moving his tanks over on another side, and then you just declare, yeah, I'm performing an ambush action, and you just pew right over there toward them. And a lot of people, especially if there's a nice open road or something like that, they may not necessarily see that coming. They may think, oh, there's got to be cover in the way. And maybe there is, but that doesn't stop you from shooting unless you have to pass through, not just partially obscured by, but through a forest or a ruin, right? Some sort of, terrain that would actually block line of sight going through it. So on the whole, I think they have some place. There are some armies that really appreciate having them because, again, if you cap out at pen plus 4, other than this weapon, this might be your weapon, right? That's just the way it is. But I think in general, if you decided to leave this at home and go with something a little bit smaller, a little more utility, or just put it on wheels, I think you might end up with a better option. Am I completely off? Have I completely missed something that's very obvious about the medium anti-tank gun? Is it better than I am making it out to be? Does it need to go down even lower than 50 points in order to make it worthwhile? What is it about this weapon that you think is exceptional or needs to be changed? Let me know down in the comments below, and I will see you next time.